So let's begin with a little meditation, as we've been doing. Let's sit comfortably with your body straight, your spine straight, and relax the muscles of your body. Relax your body in general. Relax your mind. Nothing else you have to worry about. And begin by placing your attention, your mindfulness, on the breathing, without controlling it, just like watching it. Especially the endpoints. Of course, know when you're breathing in as opposed to breathing out. But the endpoints, when it changes direction, when the breathing seemingly is not there for a moment, the mind has a tendency of being, is sort of like the expression, when the cat is away, the mice will play. So, almost as though you may not be watching it then, so the mind begins to go on to other thoughts. Let go of everything else, every other thought, and just grasp the breathing. See if you can cut through the other perceptions that are being partially, you're paying partial attention to your body, maybe some pain in your body or some sound that you find irritating or something. Cut through them and just focus on the respiration, sort of like that's there at the center. Let the others fade as you don't pay attention to them. Encourage yourself by thinking that this kind of meditation has great results. One might think that, you're not thinking about great, profound subjects, just watching the breathing. But you are watching with awareness the inhalation, the exhalation, the change, the nature of all of the compounded phenomena, all the things that we normally encounter have a period of rising, like the breath coming in, a period when they seem to be stable, like the moment when it's changing from the inhalation to the exhalation, and a period of separation or dissolution. Your money's gone, your friends leave, you're dying. and then a period of void at the end before another cycle arises. When the breathings become regular, more subtle, follow one breath up your nostrils as though it were going to the crown of your head, to your throat, to your heart chakra. Leave your attention there. Let go of the breathing and just watch your mind. If you don't notice anything right now, think of your mind a few minutes ago, an hour ago, a couple of hours ago, when you may have been agitated or thinking rapidly about something. The contents of the mind, like objects within the spaciousness of your mind. When you're courageous and when you're discouraged, the mind has the same nature. You can change very quickly when your mind becomes unhappy or discouraged just by remembering that. Here our object is the nature of the mental consciousness, the subjective mind, rather than the things that we usually are thinking of, objects that are within the mind, mental images, which refer to things outside. We think we're thinking about things outside, relationships, goals that we might have for the future, things that we're successful about or unsuccessful about in the past. So to bring the attention away from the outside to the mental images of them, and then turn your attention away from the objective thoughts within the mind to the consciousness that's clear and knowing, those two characteristics. Immaterial, unobstructing, clear in those ways, but also clear like a mirror or a lens that takes on the aspect of whatever presents itself to it. The mind also has the function of knowing, such as the subtle mind that looks at the appearance of the self and either knows it incorrectly or knows it correctly. Here, one part of the mind watching the rest of the mind. Everywhere that mind is clear, is unobstructing, is reflective. And within your awareness, there may be still the sense of your body looming there, sort of unassailable, undeniable. That is appearing to your consciousness as a thought via your body sense consciousness. So withdraw your attention away from the object to the consciousness to which that body is appearing. That particular instance of consciousness also is clear in knowing. And then the sense of an observer, a self. It may be that that self has a particular dynamic to it right now, as though it was the self that's been accused by others, or accused itself, having error, being wrong, or not being good enough. Let yourself take cognizance of that. Pay attention to that, how that's appearing to your mind, the self. It seems to be something which is there by its own power. Perhaps experiencing what our senses perceive, sort of like the owner of the senses, in a sense, but even the owner of the mental consciousness. Without disturbing the calmness of the clarity that you've begun to perceive, analyze this self with a little fish of, as though swimming through the pond of your mind, a little fish of analysis. This self that's appearing seems to be something that's singular. There doesn't seem to be multiple selves. Seems to be existing there by its own, on its own, from its own side. The self is not something you can see, or smell, or taste, or hear, touch. It's something our mental consciousness conjures up. If such a thing existed, it would either have to be the same as our collection of 5 aggregates that we usually associate with a self, or would have to be different from them. If it existed on its own and was different than the aggregates, it could have no connection with them. You wouldn't be able to perceive them. It would have no relation to them. Because just perceiving them means that it's somehow dependent upon them. If it were the same as the aggregates, the body, feelings, discriminations, compositional factors, consciousness, as there are 5 aggregates, there would have to be 5 selves, but we only perceive one self. As 2 things, if 2 things were to exist, there are only 2 alternatives. They can either be the same or they can be different. Here the aggregates that are the basis that we consider the self, and this self that's appearing to us are not the same. They're not one. They're not different. Therefore, one of these 2 does not exist. This self that we've believed in since beginningless time doesn't exist the way that it appears to our mind. Let that self, that subtle perception of the self, fade into the clarity of your mind. That self that we've believed in since beginningless time doesn't exist at all. And think this clear nature of the mind is my incredible resource, my Buddha potential, my conventional Buddha nature that I can observe now. I've had all the time since beginningless time, but have rarely paid attention to it. think that with this life of leisure and endowment I have right now, I can recognize this clear light nature, and I can use this life, what's left of it, to practice the Dharma. I think that this year, this month, this coming month of the new year, this day, this hour, I'm going to pay attention to the Dharma. I'm going to try to leave imprint on my mind of the teachings, to overcome my faults, to develop all good qualities, to develop a sense of companionship with all other sentient beings, camaraderie. And to feel the depth of their suffering, just as I'm concerned about my own suffering. To work to alleviate their suffering. Although we can do things, we can teach, we can help people around us with tasks, we can become a doctor or healer of some kind. But the only way that we can help them ultimately, not only now but in the future, is to ourselves know the methods to lead them out of suffering, to place them into the safe location of nirvana or enlightenment. To do that, we ourselves have to be enlightened. So I think I'm going to listen to the teachings with that thought in mind. I'm going to listen to the teachings so as to become a Buddha, to become omniscient. Whatever difficulties lie within that, where we are now and that goal, just think that we're going to that ultimate destination. I'm going to listen to the teachings, participate, in order to become enlightened for the sake of all sentient beings. And then bring your attention back to the present. How are you doing? Okay? Let's start off, see if you have any questions from these series of talks that have been going on. Anything that you've got on that blank piece of paper in your mind, your question list? Yes? About the what?
Partial attention. That day somebody was asking about this multitasking, whether there is two consciousness within any one single defining moment
Right.
in a stream of consciousness.
Yeah.
And then you mentioned that the mind is capable of giving partial attention, meaning my question is to clarify whether within any one single moment, is there a split between one or more than one consciousness, or are you referring to a totally different moment, but they are so close together that the mind switch between these two moments where you call partial attention?
I think it's possible for one consciousness to be aware of two things at one time. Say, for instance, if you're looking at a person, you're aware of various parts of them all at the same time. Like, for instance, as I look at you, I'm seeing your blue shirt, but I'm also seeing your arms that are a different color. You're not blue-armed, right? You're not Vajrapani, has blue arms. So I can see those simultaneously. It's not so much, you can pay more attention to one. You can we can put my attention on the blue shirt, but still there's some awareness of the flesh color, face and arms, or I can focus on the color of your face and arms, but there's still an awareness of the blue in the background. So that one consciousness is capable of perceiving, of putting partial attention on several things at one time. Beyond a certain point, it can't pay attention. It also can alternate attention between various things. That's in addition. But say, for instance, when we try to meditate on the appearance of a self within our mental consciousness, how the self seems to be appearing. We want to simultaneously see how the self is appearing and how the consciousness is reacting to that appearance. So there's two separate things. You could alternate between the two, but I believe it's said that one consciousness can be partially aware of both. You can, as you're partially aware of both, first you put your attention on how the self is appearing, okay, as though it's self-instituted, it's there by itself. It's not something that we merely have labeled that doesn't really exist there from its own side. It seems to be existing there from its own side. Then we put a little attention on how the consciousness that's perceiving that is reacting to that, without any preconception in our own mind that it does or does not exist that way. How the consciousness is perceiving that object. Does it perceive it in such a way that it's believing that it does exist? Just the same way that as we look out now, when we look at people in this room, our mental consciousness is somehow believing that there are people here. It's not thinking that this is an illusion, that they don't really exist, right? So watching how the consciousness is reacting to that, and seeing these both at the same time, how the object appears and how the consciousness is reacting to that. So yeah, you can check, see if indeed one consciousness Because generally, it's very rare instances where you hear anyone saying that there is more than one stream of mental consciousness, or more than one stream of visual, auditory, what is this one called? Olfactory, gustatory, tactile consciousnesses. Let's say the tongue consciousness. When you eat, is there something in America at the so-called Chinese restaurants? There's one dish called sweet and sour pork. Does that really exist? Is that really Chinese, or is that just American Chinese invention? Do you ever have a sweet and sour pork here? Yeah. Okay. So your tongue consciousness, when you're eating sweet and sour pork. You know what sweet tastes like, right? If you were just have sweet, you kind of say, ah, that's sweet. If you just had sour taste, you know what that tastes like. Sour. Oh, maybe if you're Chinese, sour. I'm not sure. Sometimes people don't like sour, sometimes they like sour. So when you taste sweet and sour pork, is your tongue consciousness tasting both at the same time? Or is it alternating between perceiving sweet and sour? Because there's two objects, right? There are actually different receptors there for sweet and sour. Is there an experience at the same time of sweet and sour? Okay, there you go. You check next time. Is your mental consciousness alternating between recognizing the sweet and the sour, or does it seem like both there partially? If you were to add something else, some other flavor, maybe things get a little bit more hazy. One consciousness can't split its attention into many parts. And as an ordinary being, the Buddha's mind can pay attention to everything, all objects of the past, the present, the future. So the enormity of the past, the enormity of the future, the vastness of the present, out in space and so forth, knows all of those simultaneously. So does the Buddha's mind have to go through them individually? Or does he know them all at once? He knows them all at once. So our mind can't do that now, but we have a certain amount of capacity to know, let's say, sweet and sour at the same time, I think. Some tenets, maybe some in the Theravada perhaps, they say that the Buddha doesn't know everything at the same time. The Buddha's mind knows everything, but has to go through them sequentially. A little bit like this thought that one consciousness can't be aware simultaneously of several things. So it's not a matter of the Buddha having numberless consciousnesses that know the numberless things. Because one consciousness knows them all. Does that help? Okay, I mean, it's something to think about. You can analyze other situations. Okay. So the subject today is about the 3 higher trainings. We've talked a little bit about this before, but the 3 higher trainings are called there's particular, they're called higher trainings from the viewpoint of Buddhism, because other religious traditions, say the Vedic traditions, also had trainings in these same subjects. We talk about the higher training in ethics, the higher training in samadhi, or concentration, and the higher training in wisdom. So let's say the non-Buddhist schools in India at the time of the Buddha, some of the schools were Vedic, some of them were other sets of tenets. You know what I mean by Vedas? What are the Vedas? You nodded. What are the Vedas? What? Non-Buddhist? Yeah, but what was their... Is that Hinduism? So the common term Hinduism today maybe include many, many Vedic schools that, maybe even some non-Vedic schools. The Vedas were some texts and the knowledge embedded in those texts that the ancient Indians believed were eternal knowledge. Sometimes they could be written down and spoken and recited, and sometimes they were just memorized, but as though there was some idea that this knowledge, the words that expressed that knowledge were eternal. That's the basis for some of the Buddhist refutations when we talk about, like, for instance, the famous logical argument, sound is impermanent because it's a product. So they would refute the existence of the eternal Vedas, the sound of which was unchanging. That's one of the reasons that logical argument was used. So in some of the Vedic schools, even the Jain schools, the Jains, do you know who the Jains were? Have you heard of the Jain school? Have you? No. Have you heard? Anyone who, in India, are the Jains? Do you know of the Jains today? Who are the Jains? There was a founder of the Jain religion that was a contemporary of the Buddha, right? And we still have today in India followers of the Jains. Sometimes the Jains also wore no clothes. Were some Jains naked? No? Pardon? That I'm not sure. Do you know? The only religion that did not spread out in India, or is not spread? Oh, spread outside of India. Okay. Oh, there. Yeah. I mean, there are Jains in America. There are Jain temples also, but not so much. So there were various religions in other religious traditions in India at the time of the Buddha, and they had their own trainings in ethics, their own practices of ethics, their own practices of concentration, meditative concentration, and their own practices of wisdom. But what distinguishes the three higher trainings, which is something that we apply to the Buddhist practice of these, is that those practices were based on refuge in the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha, with possibly even a motivation to escape from cyclic existence. With these characteristics, those trainings are called higher trainings. So they're kind of exclusive to Buddhism. So the person has taken refuge in Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha. And with the intention, when practicing these, with the intention at least to escape from cyclic existence. Or, from the Bodhisattva point of view, to achieve enlightenment. One practices these. So here, I've mentioned before several things about these. In one sense, they act as supports of one another. Which one is highest? Which is supported on the other two? Is morality is supported on wisdom and concentration? Wisdom is the highest, so it's supported on morality, right? Which is supported on concentration. Morality at the bottom, right? Sort of like if you think of a pyramid, ethics acts as a support of concentration, which acts as a support of wisdom. So what's in one sense, what we want, ultimately what we wanted to develop is a special kind of discriminating awareness, a special kind of wisdom which perceives the ultimate nature of phenomena. We understand that it is that wisdom that can provide us with a tool to escape from cyclic existence, to give us the courage to practice the Bodhisattva path, and then to culminate that path. We can't become Buddhas. We can't even escape from cyclic existence to achieve nirvana without this wisdom that realizes the ultimate nature of phenomena. Right? So that's the culmination, like the tip of the pyramid. We have a little bit of wisdom now if we try to meditate on, like in our meditation before, if you try to meditate on how the self is appearing and try to analyze how that doesn't exist that way, a little preliminary meditation on emptiness. Your mind, it might be not really focused. You can get a little glimmer of that for a second, and your mind might be distracted onto something else. Sometimes it's distracted grossly. Sometimes it's distracted subtly. You don't even notice. There's part of your attention. It's kind of multitasking. Part of your attention is going on to something else. In fact, that's a very common example, right? When we talk about distraction, those of you who studied before, part of your attention may be on the main object you're trying to see, but part of your attention is thinking about lunch or, the cinema or the park you're going to go to or whatever. So your mind is kind of split in its attention. Not different consciousnesses. One consciousness, its power is being, its intensity is being sapped, by sort of leaking into other avenues, into other objects. So to really utilize that wisdom, you need to have concentration. You need to be able to have the mind focused on one thing. That's why it's said that concentration acts as a support for wisdom. Without that concentration, we may have some wisdom now. Say if you've studied a lot and you have naturally a sharp mind because of karmic imprints from past lives. Maybe you've honed that mind in the Singapore school system. You've studied all the subjects. You feel like you've sharpened your mind well. But still, if you lack concentration, it won't be able to penetrate and see the object well. Example I've given before, when if you were to imagine coming and trying to look at these beautiful paintings here at night, sort of like you got the someone to let you in at night. You're giving a tour to your mother or your friends or something. But in opening the door, there's some breeze coming through, and you're holding up a candle. The candle is flickering, and although you can get a glimpse of that, say that one tanka there of Lama Tsongkhapa with all these other deities around, so much detail, you can kind of get a glimpse of it for a second when the candle flame is there, and then when the candle flame moves aside, it disappears, and you can't get a clear perception of that. You can't see it clearly, even though you have good eyesight. So like that, when the mind is still flickering, when it doesn't have concentration, you won't be able to utilize the wisdom. You won't be able to develop it to understand the object. Likewise, the concentration depends on having a foundation of ethics. Why is that? There's several reasons. I mentioned once before, I think, Once when my teacher Lama Yeshe, founder of the FPMT, Lama Sopa Rinpoche's teacher, and has anyone here ever meet Lama Yeshe in the past? I think he maybe died before you met the Dharma. Lama Yeshe was giving a talk to the Sangha in Dharamsala, the Western monks and nuns. And he said, many people want to develop single-pointed concentration. That's you say we have wisdom, concentration. So say even some people want to develop a concentration for the supposed goals, the supposed fruits of that. For instance, psychic powers. If you develop single-pointed concentration, you can develop the clairvoyance that knows others' minds. Wouldn't you like to know what others are thinking? That's not why you develop concentration from a Buddhist point of view, just to know others' minds. But to know, say for instance, if they ask a question, what's really behind their question. To know really what's really bothering them and so forth. You can develop all sorts of miraculous powers, and so Lama said, many people would like to develop single-pointed concentration, but they don't know what the essential trick is. What's the special element? Morality, pure morality. Why is that? Because when you're practicing ethics and morality, the meaning of morality is to, in this sense, is to abstain from engaging in negative actions. So you have to be vigilant of your mind. You have to be mindful of what's happening. So you prevent yourself from engaging in actions of body and speech, like killing, stealing, sexual misconduct, by cutting them off when the delusions start to arise that might incite you into those practices. That's the practice of ethics. So in so doing, you're providing a basis for the concentration that doesn't have naturally many, many strong emotions and delusions rising, because you are, through your practice of ethics and being mindful of your body and speech, you're consequently trying to guard the mind from engaging in the delusions that give rise to those. So your mind is calm. There's not a lot of distractions. And in keeping the ethical vows of restraining from negative actions, you are training, like sharpening your mindfulness. You are learning what mindfulness means. It means to keep in mind, let's say for instance, keep in mind that you are not to kill, you're not to steal, you're not to lie, and so forth. So morality acts as a basis for the concentration. Even another way it acts as a basis, because there's no way that we can practice from scratch these higher trainings of concentration and wisdom without having a human lifetime, a human birth. You can't practice as an animal. You can't practice as a hungry ghost. Your mind and life is totally engulfed in suffering and worry and looking after, trying to find things. You can't practice higher training of concentration and wisdom in the hell realms. Have you ever heard of anyone practicing in the hell realms? Sometimes bodhisattvas go down there by their own prayers, by their own wishes, volitionally, and they already have a strong mind, and they try to lead people through their own behavior, even as animals. Sometimes the bodhisattva appeared as an animal, sometimes, but generally, beings in the lower realms don't have the capacity to practice concentration and wisdom. What's the main cause of being born as a human? Pure ethics, ethical behavior. So that also acts, you might say from that point of view, from the point of view of being the foundation which gives us the basis of a life, of a human. It's a basis from which we can subdue the various disturbing thoughts so the mind is more calm, so we can be successful in concentration. And it's also a method to develop the faculty of mindfulness by which we can develop concentration, because concentration depends on mindfulness. Those of you who were in the class the other day when we were talking about the mind and mental factors, remember there's a mental factor called mindfulness? Is that one of the ever-present factors, or the object ascertaining factors, or virtuous mental factors? Do you remember? It's not one of the ever-present mental factors. It's one of the object ascertaining. Also, one of the object ascertaining mental factors was samadhi, concentration. So they're slightly different, but concentration depends upon mindfulness. Mindfulness is the ability to recall something which you just were familiar with. Not just to recall like to bring it back, but to keep it in mind, like the glue that sticks it in mind. So that's kind of the function of these three higher trainings. All of the eightfold noble path that we talk about often in the Theravada tradition, what the Arya beings practice once they've realized the Four Noble Truths, they engage in what are called the eightfold noble path. You've heard that term? The Bodhisattva's similar training is called the Six Perfections, the training of the Six Perfections. So the Bodhisattva's training and the Eightfold Noble Path, both can be summarized in these three higher trainings. Like say, for instance, the first three of the Bodhisattva perfections are what? Generosity, ethics, morality, and patience, right? Like you're being patient with the teacher right now. It's a boring subject. Those three can be included in the higher training of morality. Then what's the fourth perfection? Joyfulness? Joyful effort, joyful perseverance. Perseverance is a joyful effort. So that means a mind that's happy to engage in virtue, not just ordinary perseverance of a merchant or someone who's happy, or a thief who's has so much perseverance to break this combination on this safe or something like that. That's not called joyful effort. Although they might be joyful and they're providing effort, it means being joyful in engaging in virtuous actions, in virtuous activity. So that applies to morality, the higher training of morality, which is the first three of the six perfections: generosity, morality, and patience. But it also applies to the next two, the Bodhisattva's perfection of meditative, meditation, dhyana, which corresponds to the higher training of samadhi. Actually, different words. In the three higher trainings is called the higher training of samadhi, but in the Bodhisattva's perfection, it's not called the perfection of samadhi. Did you know that? It's called the perfection of dhyana, or in the word from Pali is jhana, and a little more encompassing. So the Bodhisattva's practice of the perfection of dhyana, or meditation, if you want to call it, stabilized mind, is included in the higher training of concentration. And the same word, though, is used here. The Bodhisattva's perfection of wisdom is called the prajna paramita, the perfection of wisdom, or the wisdom gone beyond. That is included in the higher training in wisdom. Okay, so all of the Eightfold Noble Path and the Bodhisattva's perfections can all be included into these three higher trainings. So it's if you understand them, it's a comprehensive way of understanding what you need to practice. So first of all, practice of higher training of ethics or morality. What does that mean? From the Hinayana point of view, mainly it means the practice of abstaining from creating negative karma that harms yourself and harms others. It's called shila, with an I. I think in Australia there's a nickname for women in general. They say, "Oh, did you see that Sheila?" Some pretty girl or something like that. Or there's a girl's name named Sheila. That's spelled that way. Shila. Shila, which has, from the root of it, has to do with the sense of cooling. So Shila is that practicing ethics or morality is that which cools the mind. Now, in Western philosophy, maybe if you went to university, did you have a course in ethics or morality? Anyone? So sometimes it's a specialized subject. There are various ideas of whether morality is natural or whether it's artificial and so forth. From a Buddhist perspective, ethics and the observances that we try to make, what we try to abstain from, are not just like edicts of the Buddha who just said, this is what you've got to do. Or like in Christianity, what was it, Moses came down from the mountain after having some interaction with God. Do you know the story? What did he bring down? He had carved into stone the 10 Commandments or something, as though God had made these. You should not do this. You shouldn't make graven images. Was that one of the 10 Commandments? You know what graven images means? You shouldn't, make images carved or statues of these other gods and so forth. So it's not as though the Buddha commanded people, you've got to do this to please me. The Buddha was pointing out the natural law of karma, that if you engage in actions that are motivated by the delusions, you leave karmic instincts in your mind stream, like seeds, that will bring about suffering for you in the future, and that are obstacles to your making spiritual progress. So it wasn't that the Buddha was saying, you must do these things because I said so. Just to please me. He was pointing out the natural law. Do you know the actions that we try to abstain from in this first level of ethics, of morality? You try to abstain from negative actions. Do you know what the main actions are? What? Going to a non-Buddhist church? Is that one of the negative actions? No. What do they call the 10 paths of non-virtue? So it doesn't mean that every negative action is included in these 10, but the ones that are most obvious and heavy, the ones that we do most habitually. So they're divided into 3 sets. 3 actions of body. How many actions of speech? 4 actions of speech, and then again 3 actions of mind. So they're kind of easy to remember, not to, to abstain from killing, which means taking the life of another sentient being consciously with volition. If you accidentally step on an ant and you think, oh, I've killed, I'm going to hell, That's an over-exaggeration, or that's an exaggeration. In fact, it's an over-exaggeration. I'll be doubly redundant. It's over. You need to have volition for that action to be a complete path that would throw you into lower realms. You still create some negative karma, but not something that will necessarily ripen. Not to engage, not to steal, take what is not freely yours. I remember once when walking with Geshe Zopa on the path, I saw a penny on the path and I bent over to pick it up, and Geshe said, "Don't. Yeah, that's not yours." If we go on the path, if you see a 10 Singapore dollar note, would you bend down to pick it up? Yeah, we would, right? But is it yours? Well, you might think, you might say, oh no, it doesn't belong to anyone. But someone may actually still think that that's theirs. So you have to be careful not to take what is not freely given. I actually encountered 12 Singapore dollars on my walk a couple of days ago, and at first I thought to do that. I thought I would give it to someone. I said, could you ask around? These 3 joggers came by. Could you ask around if anyone's lost money? And they said, no, give it to the police. So I just left it back down on the ground. So anyway, not to steal. So things that we usually think of as stealing is also including cheating on your income tax or things like that would be stealing, right? That creates negative karma. So ethics tries to avoid engaging in that action. Also, sexual misconduct. In the 10 Commandments, I don't know if you know the 10 Commandments, what is the one that is sort of similar to that? It's written, I think, from the point of view of the male point of view. Do not covet thy neighbor's wife. Do you know the word covet? That means kind of like have strong attachment, like you want to get. To covet something. Also in Buddhism, when we talk about the 3 negative actions of mind, covetousness means a state of mind that wants to obtain something which is belongs to someone else. Okay, to covet. It can be that's extreme form of attachment. You know, not just ordinary attachment for things that you can buy in the store or things that belong to yourself. So those are called, killing, stealing, sexual misconduct are called the three negative actions of body. Speech is to avoid lying. Have you ever lied? Sometimes I've heard people say, when they misspeak, they say something incorrectly, and they say, oh no, I've lied. If you misspeak, that's not lying, right? Do you know that? Like, say, for instance, someone says, can you help me out? How much money? Can you give me $5? And you say, no, I've only got $4. I can't. Then you check and you've actually got $5. You thought you had $4. Is that lying? No, it's not lying. It's not consciously deceiving others. To lie is to consciously, with intention, to deceive others. How about this? If someone comes in the room and says, we're looking for, what's your name? Joya? Joy. We're looking for Joy. We're going to execute her. There's some police or something, secret police. And if we were to say, Joy? I think she went out that way. Is that lying? From a Hinayana point of view, that's lying. You wouldn't be able to say that. From Mahayana view, is that lying? Yes, it's still lying, but with the motivation of saving Joy's life, with a higher motivation, one even engages in negative actions of body and speech, like lying, with a higher motivation. Does that make sense? You might say, oh, the Buddha gave dispensation to the Mahayanas to engage in the negative actions of body and speech. But one has to be very careful. It has to be with very high, pure motivation for the benefit of sentient beings. So, lying, divisive speech is, of all the various kinds of negative actions of speech, is considered to be the most heavy, the most consequential, having very grave consequences on us in the future. What is divisive speech? What else do you call it? How do you usually translate it? Second one. What else do you call it? What do you call the four actions of speech? Put it that way. Lying, harsh speech, idle gossip, and what was the second one? Lying. No, we got the third. We got the first, third, and fourth. Lying, harsh speech, idle gossip. What's the second one called? What? Slander. Another way it's translated, right? So slander. I'm not sure the implication. What does slander mean? When you say something about others to bring down people's opinion of them, and you know that it's not true, right? Is that kind of the meaning of slander? That's kind of the sense of divisive speech. Divisive speech is that which you intentionally trying to separate the rapport between two people. Do you know what I mean by rapport? The confidence they have within one another. So, of the various kinds of divisive speech, which is the heaviest? Do you know, Joy? Which is the heaviest divisive speech? Famous. One of the 5 actions of immediate retribution, or we call it 5 heinous acts, to cause division of the Sangha at the time of the Buddha. Do you know what that means? So who did that? Devadatta, yeah. Naughty. You know, he was cousin of the Buddha, right? He was in the royal court. He came when the Buddha became famous. He had become enlightened and tried to bask in light. All his life, even as a youth, he was a rival of Siddhartha when they were youth. And in previous lifetimes, many previous lifetimes, he had been born in such a situation. He was always tried to outdo the Buddha. You know, he wasn't the Buddha then. Siddhartha was even in another lifetime, had different names, was on the Bodhisattva path. But he had some karmic relationship with Devadatta all this time. Almost it seems like Devadatta might have been an emanation of the Buddha, you know, to do these incredible naughty things. You know, one of the things he did was he said that, the Buddha's ethics were not right because he said that you could drink milk. And what was wrong with that? Do you know? You know the story? Why was that such a bad thing? Because it was depriving the calves of some milk from the mother or something like that, you know. And so he made his own ethical system that he said was superior, and tried to cause some of the monks that were part of the Buddha's Sangha to come with him. He had some other rules also, not just that one. It's said that to cause schism in the Sangha or the spiritual community is one of the heaviest negative karmas that you can create. So, and that's an action of speech. So, very careful in a spiritual community not to, not yourself to instigate any kind of separation between various members. So-and-so is doing this and this, and causing some sort of discord. That's very, very negative karma. What's the opposite of divisive speech? which is actual virtuous action, to bring together in harmony, to try to work out people's differences with good heart, so that there is again companionship, and the ill will that was there before is diminished. I'm not sure what word we use in English. So the four actions of speech that are especially to be avoided in practicing ethics are lying, divisive speech, you want to try to avoid. Harsh words, which we often say. I find myself easily, especially in America, when you get telephone calls, sometimes it's some telemarketer. Do you know what that is? Saying, "Oh, you've just won a trip to Hawaii. All you have to do is," I'd like to say, I'm tempted to say something harsh to them. I usually just hang up. Some people are incredibly kind. They listen to the whole thing and they say, "Oh, I'm sorry. I don't want to do that." I don't have that degree of patience usually. I should. And the last one is idle gossip. So you might think, you know what idle gossip means? What's another way of saying idle gossip? That senseless speech. Most of our, when you go to meet your friend for tea, or you go out, most of what we're talking about doesn't have a particular higher aim. It's just like saying, "Oh, do you know what Joy is doing? Do you know what George is doing? George did this," So idle gossip is said to be nowhere as heavy as divisive speech, but because we do it again and again, it accumulates and it becomes incredibly heavy. Even one action of divisive speech can become heavy because we're familiar with it. And as we're familiar with any action, we're not applying any hesitancy. Say, for instance, if you're a hunter, or if you kill the bugs, you put out the poison for the bugs is a profession. Unfortunately, my father, I remember one time one of his ventures was he and his brother, my uncle, made a company called, my father's name was George and his brother's name was Walter, G&W Exterminating Company. I remember, when I met the Dharma, I realized how probably tens of thousands of cockroaches and mosquitoes and other things they had killed for money. The people who put out the spray to kill the mosquitoes that might be carrying dengue, are they also engaged in this? Maybe, if they're doing it just for money, but the purpose of that is to ensure the lives of human beings so that they might have higher goals. At Kopan once, in the first meditation course, we had these, the only toilets were holes that were dug in the ground. I think in America they call them deep drop. Your doo-doo drops down into the hole. There's some pieces of wood that you squat on, and then there's a slat, and you drop down into that. And in the afternoons, the flies would come and they lay their eggs on that. The larvae would harvest, and then many more flies would come, which then infested the kitchen, landed on the food, and the boys would get sick. So Lama Yeshe had given us permission to put out lime. We would go into each of those bins and we'd put white lime. You know what lime is? What is it? I'm not sure the chemical composition. It's something that can kill the larvae, but also it doesn't allow the surface of the caca to be interesting to them any longer. Lime is what they use to decompose flesh also. So Lama had said, when done with a higher motivation for the benefit, say, of these younger monks or all the people that were eating the food, that was much different. You might quibble and say, like Devadatta, that's not true ethics. But anyway, so actions can become heavy because of habituality, that you do them again and again. Someone who kills again and again, someone who lies again and again, or even idly gossip again and again, because we do it so often and there's no inhibition, that action becomes heavy. Say if you do a negative action only rarely, and because you do it rarely, because you've been avoiding it, you do it with great hesitancy, that action already loses much of its negative potential. When your mind has that hesitancy. And then there are three negative actions we try to avoid of the mind. What are those? Covetousness, this one that I was mentioning before. Malice or maliciousness, and wrong view, holding wrong views. What if you hold a wrong view without knowing? Is that a negative karma? It depends on how strongly you hold it. Sometimes you hold very strongly that there is no past and future lives, there's no achievement of liberation or enlightenment. Even in the face of explanation and so forth, you adamantly hold your position. That's an extreme kind of wrong view. What does malice mean? Malice is a mental action. It doesn't have to be expressed physically or verbally. Malice is a state of mind that wants others to suffer. Exactly the opposite of compassion and loving kindness, that wants others to be free of suffering and to be happy. Does that ever arise in your mind? When you see someone who's harmed you, you're kind of thinking, you're harboring thoughts, I hope they're humiliated when they get up to give their acceptance speech as the club president. I hope they make a fool of themselves, or, it's the state of mind that would feel glad when they step in mud or, fall down or something like that. Covetousness is a state of mind, extreme kind of attachment that wants to attain something that belongs to others, to covet. So these are the actions, and the negative actions were the main ones that the Buddha explained. He called sometimes we call the 10 non-virtuous. What if I call them, have you heard the term the 10 paths of non-virtuous actions? Where the word paths is added in there? What's the difference between the 10 non-virtues and the 10 paths of non-virtue? Some of you were studying in the basic program. Did you study Lanrim? Karma and something? What are the paths of non-action? Come again? You have to give her the microphone. I can't hear.
I think path is a state of mind.
It refers to a state of mind. It refers to all of the elements that are necessary to complete a complete action that will throw you into lower realms, such as there has to be a proper object. If you want to kill George and you kill Joy by mistake, or vice versa, although you create heavy negative karma, definitely, you don't complete the path of action of killing. You have to have the motivation. If you step on an insect and kill it without wishing to, that is not a path of action that will throw you into the lower realms necessarily. Might, with other factors, but if you don't complete the act, if the action is not completed, like say for instance, if Joy and I are in a duel with, like the guns, and we both shoot at the same time, we both get shot, and if she dies before I die, we both die. If she dies before I die, who created the path of action? If she dies before I die, I complete, because there's a completion of the action. But if she dies before I die, she didn't complete the action. I died afterwards. Huh? So if you can, knowing these various factors, if you can avoid actions, even you start something, if you recognize the action you're doing is negative, don't complete it. If you were about to steal, just put back. If you're about to kill the insects, that didn't have to be for health, for the benefit of other sentient beings, didn't have to be killed, restrained from that. So restraint from these 10 non-virtues are the main objects of the ethics in the Hinayana tradition. In the Mahayana, is that the main thing? What in the Mahayana was? What else? Sisi, what else? Is it you just observe abstention from more negative actions in the Mahayana? Or they're giving you a microphone. No, I want you, so that others can hear you also. You just have to press it down for a while. Yeah.
Sorry? Yeah, you were saying?
In the in the Mahayana ethics, or the practice of morality or ethics, so is that only different in the sense that you try to abstain from even more negative actions than in the Hinayana?
I think we need to, in Mahayana, concentrate more in wisdom, whereas on the basis of the ethic, then concentrate on the wisdom as well.
Who else thinks? What do you think? Do you know? Have you studied Mahayana ethics? So is that right? No, you do. No. At the bottom, you have to press that button. There you go.
Sorry, the question is in Mahayana?
Is the ethics, say, compared to the ethics of the Hinayana, where you restrain from basically these 10 non-virtuous actions. Many others you restrain from, but they're the main ones. What's the difference of the Mahayana ethics? Is it simply you restraining from more negative actions?
My understanding is that there are 3 moralities. There is the refraining from negative actions. There is the active action of accumulation of merit, gather virtues. And thirdly, there is the need to engage in the welfare of other sentient beings.
Eccola, as the Italians say. Right. So, you're studying basic, but you should remember that when, say for instance, when we say the Lama Chopa Puja, the Guru Puja, there are 2 verses that talk about the 3 Mahayana ethical trainings. So you should look in your Lama Chopa, see if you find. Many times people don't know what they're saying, but you just explained. So the first is similar to the Hinayana, the first Mahayana, 3 kinds of Mahayana morality. This is not exemplified in the Hinayana in general. It's the abstention from non-virtuous actions. To abstain, that means to consciously refrain from doing those negative actions. Not simply just to lock yourself up in a little room so you don't have a chance to kill or steal or lie, but to consciously refrain from them. In the Mahayana, there are indeed a greater number of things that you refrain from. For also, you refrain from infractions of the Bodhisattva vows, and if you've taken tantric vows, you abstain from infractions of those tantric vows. But in addition to that, there's 2 other Mahayana ethicals. One is what's called accumulating virtuous dharmas. So in one sense, that includes accumulating virtuous karma, because the Bodhisattva's intention is to create the cause to emanate the two bodies for the sake of others, the Nirmanakaya and Sambhogakaya, and they depend on the collection of merit, virtuous karma. The collection of virtuous karma, collection of merit, essentially synonymous. Okay? Merit. But the collection of virtuous dharma includes other things. For instance, collection of virtuous dharma means listening to teachings, learning more and more, collecting, accumulating all of the knowledge that you need to be able to practice and to benefit others. Listening to teachings is also like Lama Zopa Rinpoche, always going to teachings, upholding the teachings, spreading them, and so forth. Accumulating virtuous dharma. So it's not just, it doesn't say accumulating virtuous merit or virtuous karma, it says virtuous dharmas. So that includes merit, it includes practices, the ability to offer tormas, to get rid of spirits, to dispel, and so forth and so on. When I was in Taiwan many, many years ago at a conference Lama Yeshe had asked me to go to, I was in Taipei for a couple of days before the conference started, and I heard of one Tibetan Rinpoche that was there who supposedly lived in Taipei and was kind of trying to live in the world, kind of like the Bodhisattva, live in the world in this sort of kind of, I don't know. Well, obviously, the communist world, you don't have as much freedom as we have here, but trying to live in this environment and benefit sentient beings. And one thing he told me was that he tried to learn all of these different methods from the different black magics and so forth to get rid of spirits and so forth. So accumulating virtuous dharmas in whatever way they might be. The third Mahayana ethics is the ethics of benefiting sentient beings. So in Atisha's Bodhi Pratibha-dipam, the lamp of the path, he mentions, I think from the sutras, 11 different ways to benefit sentient beings, such as when people are in the hospital, to go to help them and so forth. All of the Bodhisattva perfections, and so all of the Bodhisattva vows, generally we talk about, how many Bodhisattva vows are there, do you know? How many root vows? 18 root vows. How many auxiliary vows? 48? That's how many states we had in how many? 46? Yeah, branch vows. How many branch vows do we have? Okay, that's your lesson. That's your task tonight, to find out how many branch vows. So of those branch vows, you can divide up into those that are obviously, you're taking that vow to abstain from negative actions. Some of those vows are to ensure that you collect virtuous dharmas. Another set of them are divided up, those of the vows that are meant to explicitly benefit sentient beings. If you ever have a chance to receive teachings, Lama Tsongkhapa wrote a long commentary on a chapter in a Sangha's, I think in the Bodhisattva Bhumi, on ethics. Bodhisattva Bhumi talks about ethics, I think, Bodhisattva ethics, and in there he talks about the vows. Lama Tsongkhapa wrote a commentary to that included all the details of the Bodhisattva vows. Oh, so interesting! All of the details. What constitutes breaking the root vow and the secondary vow and so forth. So, these are called the 3 kinds of Mahayana ethics. So that acts, the practice of ethics acts as the basis for concentration, the higher training of concentration or samadhi. So what is samadhi? Why does one develop that samadhi from a Mahayana point of view? Well, generally, common with the Theravada tradition, one develops samadhi and general meditation, concentration, in order to act as a basis for wisdom, right? But the bodhisattvas develop it also to develop the common siddhis, not cities, that's C-I-T-I-E-S, siddhis, S-I-D-D-H-I. If it's plural, you can put, in English, you can put S right at the end. So the most important of those siddhis for the bodhisattva is the ability to know the minds of others. In fact, Atisha wrote in his Bodhipratyapadipam that the bodhisattva can't really help sentient beings very deeply unless they have this kind of clairvoyance. So therefore, the bodhisattvas have to develop this. It's even another reason for developing concentration. Have you heard that before? Did you know that? Did you study the Atisha's text, The Lamp of the Path? Anyone? No? You did not part of the regular curriculum. You know what? That book is the basis upon which Lama Tsongkhapa based the Lanrim Chemo. You know, he even writes in there at the beginning when he talks about the exceptional quality of the author. Essentially, he's talking about Atisha. It tells about Atisha's life and I don't know why he came to write this text, the Bodhipratyapadipam, that he wrote in Tibet, right? So in that text, Atisha says that in order to really benefit sentient beings, the bodhisattvas need to have single-pointed concentration in order to develop this clairvoyance so that you know when you're talking to other sentient beings where their question's coming from, or even if they ask no question, you know their mind. There are many examples. Once when the very first time I heard Lama Yeshe teach at Kopan in 1974, I remember everyone was so excited. Oh, Lama Yeshe's come back from America. We'd been studying for about 2 weeks with Lama Zopa, and already we were convinced, yeah, Lama Zopa's the real thing, is really heavyweight, you know, very serious and so forth. And so Lama Yeshe comes very smiling and sort of casual, and we think, yeah, someone said, how could he be any better than Lama Zopa? He's just like casual, you know, and smiling all the time. So at one point, there was question and answer. It was the first time Lama had spoken to our group, first time we'd heard him speak. And someone asked a question, and Lama answered the question. And I thought, I said, he didn't understand the question. You know, what he answered, I didn't think was an answer to the question. So I raised my hand and I said, you didn't understand the question. This. And Lama smiled and said, yes, dear, and went on to say something to me, which again didn't even seem to be answering my question. Okay? But then as I sat there for a while and I realized he wasn't answering what my mouth was saying. He was answering what my mind was thinking. Do you understand? Didn't care about like what other people thought. You know, the Bodhisattva doesn't care about. Say, if you know what's going to be beneficial for others because you know their mind and you act in a certain way, others might think your action is inappropriate. You don't care about that because you're not aiming to be respected by everyone, to be held as perfect and so forth. You're acting to benefit sentient beings. So I recognized at that point, it was sort of like instant when I thought, this is my guru. This is someone who is acting for the welfare of sentient beings. and has this kind of clairvoyance. Anyway, yeah. So, in the, we take a whole course to talk about how to develop single-pointed concentration. It's not part of our curriculum this time. There are various stages that you have to develop. In one sense, you have to get rid of the main obstacles to developing single-pointed concentration. As I mentioned, maybe it was Thursday night, I mentioned there are 5 main faults to developing single-pointed concentration. The main one at the beginning is what? What's the main obstacle to developing laziness. You know, I say, laziness? What does that have to do with it? So it's not the ordinary sense of laziness, but in a sense, it's the state of mind that's doesn't have the energy to engage in the practices to develop single-pointed concentration. So to overcome that, first of all, you need to have a certain faith, extreme confidence, you know, a faith that's based on conviction that the qualities of single-pointed concentration are enormous, and there's something that you can develop then an admiration for. You know, wow, that would be great. Those things. Then that can give rise to what's called an aspiration. Aspiration is a mental factor. Remember, what was it? Ever present? Object ascertaining mental factor, right? That wishes to obtain something that you have previously understood to be admirable. You know, aspiration. On the basis of aspiration, you put effort. Let's say joyous effort in the practice. The third antidote to laziness. And the actual antidote to laziness is attained when you reach some high level of concentration. It's a mental state called what? Pliancy, right? You had said the other night, I think, right? Pliancy. So you develop a certain ability of the mind to engage in objects very, very easily. That's the actual antidote to laziness. That it itself enables you to do anything physically and mentally. So developing the Bodhisattva's perfection of concentration is one in which they try to develop these meditative abilities in order to investigate emptiness, essentially. But by the way, they're developing the clairvoyance and so forth, the ability to help others on the method side. So the concentration acts on the method side and on the wisdom side. I should put it the other way. Right side method, left side wisdom. Right? Usually we say it like that. Right, like in the right hand, the right hand represents method. Like in Lama Tsongkhapa's right, to his right hand, and the lineage that's over there, up in the clouds up there, which lineage is that? The wisdom or method lineage? What is it? Method side, right? On his left, we usually associate with the wisdom side. So that lineage up there starts with Manjushri, goes down to all these lineage lamas. That's called the wisdom lineage. You knew that, right? And why didn't you say it? So, yeah, and the various deities, they may hold, sometimes if they represent a union of method and wisdom, their right hand may be holding the symbol of wisdom, their left hand may be holding, it's supposed to be wisdom left, it's holding the symbol of method. You know, so always a union of the two. I often thought, when I first knew Lama Yeshe and Lama Zopa Rinpoche, I often thought they both exemplified that. Lama Yeshe took the aspect of let's say, Lama Zopa Rinpoche took the aspect of always talking about bodhicitta, method, but also, he was exemplification of Manjushri, the bodhisattva of wisdom, like the youthful Manjushri. Now we're not so youthful. Lama Zopa and I are the same age. What a difference. The same age, but no comparison and realization. Lama Yeshe took the aspect of always talking about wisdom, but also being the exemplification of loving kindness. So even in their demeanor, beings are sometimes the union of method and wisdom. So the Bodhisattva, the higher training of wisdom, common to the higher training of wisdom in the Theravada or the Hinayana, mainly involves developing what's called supramundane Vipassana. Do you know what I mean? You've heard the word Vipassana? Or Vipassana, I think in Pali. Vipassana, we could translate as higher insight or special insight. It's like the analogy I gave in the class the other day. Once you've calmed the mind, like the mind, the clarity of the mind is like a pool of water that might have dirt in it. Like the classic example is that in the time of the Buddha, a river is flowing. Generally, the river water is clear and lucid, maybe like the continuum of our mind. But when the king's horses, the troops on the horses, going off to do something, pillage or whatever, they're going off and they run through that stream, their hooves, as they go through that river or stream, the hooves of the horses bring up the dirt from the bottom, the mud, and that once the horses have gone by, the river is turbid, it's got dirt in it, and it's also agitated. That's like our mind usually, right? Because so many thoughts going on all the time. So practice of ethics and concentration are to cause that mud to sink so that the mind becomes more clear through morality, not engaging in so many discordant thoughts and activities, through concentration, letting go of those thoughts, and then calming the surface of let's say, the river. So then you would be able to develop concentration. So the example, think rather than the river now, think of a pond, the mud of which the pond has, that might have been dirty after a rainstorm, the mud has sunk to the bottom, and the surface is calm and lucid, placid, clear. What do we call? Clear lake, or what do we call it? When the lake doesn't have any waves or ripples on it. I'm not sure the word, there's some word for that. Calm lake, right? So within that lake now you take a little fish, a little koi fish, baby little koi fish, and you put into the pond or the lake. At first, when it's starting to swim around, it causes some ripples at the top, and maybe when it gets to the bottom, brings up some mud. So even though the mind had been calm before, when you first begin to try to develop Vipassana and you analyze, this little fish is like discriminating awareness, that at first, before you've developed Vipassana, it's just a method to try to develop it. You try to analyze within your calm, lucid mind of calm abiding. It causes some ripples. It brings up some other little delusions. You have to learn how to skillfully, for that fish of analysis, to skillfully navigate without bringing up more delusions. without causing the calmness to be lost. So this is common to the Hinayana and Mahayana. In the Hinayana tradition, there's more emphasis put on, there's equal emphasis, let's say, put on the mundane and supramundane Vipassana. So what does that mean? This little fish is likened to investigation that when perfected, when that fish becomes intelligent, not to bring up the dirt and cause the surface to be disturbed, that's Vipassana, okay? You can analyze within that calm mind. You can use that Vipassana for two different purposes. One, which is called Mundane Vipassana, still the same, it's still the same ability, but you've utilized it to separate yourself from the afflictions of the desire realm. You look at the desire realm where we live now and you see lifespan is limited, the delusions are gross, the pleasures are not very sophisticated and so forth. And then you look at the qualities of the first form absorption, the first form jhana, if you use Pali, or dhyana, the first form concentration, meditative absorption. You look at the qualities there. Lifespans are enormous. The pleasures are much more refined. The mind, the delusions of the desire realm are gone. Still some delusions, but much better. So you develop, you analyze like this again and again, and you develop a mind that wishes to separate from the desire realm and attain the first form absorption. It's this state then, through that analysis, that little fish analyzing that way, that Vipassana is called Mundane Vipassana. Why? Because it's still within cyclic existence. It's not proposing an alternative to cyclic existence. So you can obtain the first jhana, second jhana, third jhana, fourth jhana, so forth, the formless realms and so forth. All of those are called, the analysis using that Vipassana for that purpose is called Mundane Vipassana. If, however, you use your ability to analyze like that, to analyze selflessness or emptiness, that's called supramundane Vipassana. Beyond the world, Jikten Le Deba. How else could we, maybe supramundane, you think that I'm just making up some word. That's just translators attempt to translate that. Jikten means worldly or mundane. Le Depa means pass beyond. So the worldly or mundane one is still our meditative methods, this analysis that to achieve the jhanas or the dhyanas, the meditative absorptions. The supramundane Vipassana is the method to meditate on emptiness. It's called supramundane because the state of mind that's developed, that wisdom, that little fish's conclusion through analysis, is one that realizes emptiness or selflessness. It's used to analyze how, say, the eye is appearing. Two things. How the eye appears, the self. I don't mean the eyeball, the eye, capital I, me. How the self appears, which we were trying to experiment in our meditation at the beginning, right? I said, try to watch how the I seems to be there. Sometimes you can instigate that a little bit by remembering when you were accused or unfairly, or when you recall some very strong emotion on your part, some strong desire or something that really seems a very clear I, to watch how that appears, and then also to watch how the mind is apprehending that, whether it's believing that or disbelieving that. So it's kind of splitting or multitasking, like that question you were asking before. One part of the mind is aware of the I, this little fish. One part of the mind is also watching how the mind is apprehending it. So sometimes you put more effort on watching the how it's appearing, just subliminally aware of how the mind is conceiving that. And once that becomes clear how it's appearing, then you put more effort on how the mind is reacting to that. Is the mind kind of disbelieving that, or is it adhering to that, assenting to that, going along with that, grasping to that as true? So the supramundane Vipassana, that's its task, rather than the mundane Vipassana, which is simply developing the ability to achieve the jhanas. You achieve those meditative states, and in so doing, even attaining the preparation to those states, you create the karma to be born in those states in the future. So the Buddha did teach the mundane Vipassana to his disciples. I think at the time of the Buddha, the monastics used the achievement of those jhanas as their vacation, their chocolate. You know, they couldn't go to the, you know, to the they couldn't have wife, embrace in sexual, you know, they couldn't drink alcohol, you know, and so forth and so on. So, you know, it might seem like, wow, what a dull life. So I think, what's it called, Ajahn Brahm? How do they say his name? Longer? Ajahn Brahm, or is it some other name? Ajahn Brahma, just Ajahn Brahm. Ajahn Brahm, the Australian, actually English monk who's in Australia, English man who became a monk as abbot of the monastery of Australia, often comes to Singapore, his old friend. So he was telling me that, I think I visited the monastery when I was in Australia, where he is, and he said that's what he teaches his monks about the jhanas, and he teaches courses where people, you know, teaches how to achieve the jhanas so that you can have that kind of bliss, you know. I'm not sure how easy that is. I'm not you know, I can't say. When I was in Malaysia one time teaching at various places, I stopped in Ipoh. Do you know there's a place called Ipoh? Did you know there's a leaning tower in Ipoh? I think it's Ipoh, isn't it? I think it was Ipoh. There's a tower. They even had a postcard, like the Leaning Tower of Pisa. There's a tower, not as leaning as much as Pisa, just a little tilt. Anyway, I was in a room that many great teachers had stayed before. And I think Sakya Trizin had been there, the Karmapa, many great things. There's even the biggest, the biggest picture was of some current, I won't say his name, some current kind of Tibetan Buddhist practitioner, had been a monk for a while, teaches in Malaysia, has the name Rinpoche after his name. All these other, you know, this Sakya Trizin small picture and Karmapa small picture. This one person's picture was enormous. I thought that was a little bit funny. But in that room also there were certificates. The person whose house this was, they had gone to various meditation camps, and this one certificate said, you know, so-and-so has achieved the first jhana or the third jhana or something like this. That's really hard to do. I don't know if you're just going to a meditation camp, you know, and then you get the certificate that really attests. Because if you achieve one of the jhanas, you have a mind of the form realm. You are separated from the desires, from the delusions of the desire realm. For all intents and purposes, you would look like, for all intents and purposes, from our point of view, as you look at them, they would seem to be an arhat. You can't tell the difference. They just, while they keep that meditative, not just when they're in meditative absorption, but when they rise, they still have that mind that's separated until it begins to degenerate because they haven't enhanced it again. Generally that's not easy to do, to achieve those jhanas. So I was dubious about these certificates. Do you know anyone who said that they achieved the jhanas? Have you run across people? No. I think in Thailand and Malaysia sometimes the courses that are open to the public that try to make money, they give these certificates. So the higher training and wisdom is one in which you try to use the supramundane Vipassana, which is based on concentration, the calm abiding, which itself is based on pure ethics, especially from the Mahayana point of view, the three Mahayana moral trainings of abstaining from negative actions, collecting virtuous dharmas, and benefiting sentient beings. So we're just about the end. Any questions that came up that you want to clarify, that are going to irritate you going home that you didn't? Yeah.
The path of non-virtuous action, we can prevent whether the act is completed or not. You mentioned about stealing as an example, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
we can stop ourselves if we want to steal, then we don't complete the act.
Yeah, even, say for instance, if you want to steal them and you don't even start, there wasn't even the action. There's several parts. There's the motivation, the action, the completion of the action, and so forth, the recognition of the object, and so forth. So if you never even start, you just had the motivation, that's definitely not a path of action. So sometimes the words are mentioned, the 10 non-virtuous actions. This is just sort of saying what those kind of actions that create non-virtue are. But when you talk about the paths of non-virtue, you're referring to having all the elements that make it a fully qualified heavy negative karma that could throw you into the lower realms, but also give all of the other results of the negative karma.
If the act is mental, how do we not complete it? That's first part of the question.
Okay.
The second part is, if we realize that we have done the whole spectrum, then we
The
need
whole
to
path,
do purification to some kind of remedy. Then
Yeah.
yeah. So that's the part I don't get.
So the mental actions, sometimes if you notice malicious mind rising, thinking, this other person I don't like, and maybe beginning to think of ways that they should suffer and so forth, just to cut that off before you get to the point where you make a strong decision, I really hope they make a fool of themselves, or, I'm really going to get them. Holding, perhaps another aspect of that, of maliciousness, is to hold a grudge, sort of like a plan. When the right time comes, I'm going to get my revenge. What was that? In TV, there's this famous thing they talk about as though it's a famous Chinese adage. Revenge is a dish best served cold. Have you ever heard something like that? What does that mean? What's the idea of that? It's better to keep your grudge a long, long time, and then when they don't expect it, then you pounce. You get more. It's like the dish is cold. It's not warm right at the time. If you try to get your revenge, they might be ready for you, but you wait until they don't recognize you're still holding this grudge. So you have to cut that off before you either you come to the conclusion, I'm definitely going to do this. In case of covetousness, it keep the mind of coveting something keeps on increasing. You want to get this until you come to the conclusion, I'm going to get that one way or the other. So if you can stop before then, obviously much weaker. So in terms of purifying, if you have all the paths of action that will create the throwing karma. Even the other actions, even if they're not complete, they may throw you into the lower realms, but the throwing, having all four limbs, you create this throwing path of action, let's say, that will throw you into the lower realms. You have to apply all four opponent forces, to that, to purify that. Generally, sometimes you can weaken negative karma by meditating just on regret or any of the other opponent forces, taking refuge, vowing not to do again. Each of those four opponent forces is particularly an antidote to one of the ripening effects. You know what the ripening effects of karma are? So if you create a path of action, it's going to have four results. What's the first one called? The most heavy? Say, do you know? The maturation effect, right? The maturation effect means it will ripen or mature in rebirth, in throwing karma to be reborn within cyclic existence. So that's generally, if you talk about negative karma, it means the maturation effect will be rebirth in the lower realms, in hell or the Preta realm or as an animal. That's the maturation effect. Then there are two effects. Look at here's four, okay? I like these. You guys are good with fingers. You're showing different. So these two are related. They're both effects or results somehow related to the action. So one is called the result similar to the action as an experience. What would that be? If you've killed, what would this result be? You would have the karma to be killed or to have your life shortened, your medicine not strong, you would go through all sorts of illnesses, or to die early, or to just be killed outright. Similar to the act that you created as an experience. The other one is called the effect or result similar to the act as an action or behavior. What would that be? You will kill again. You have the habitual tendency of, easily, oh yeah, killing's okay. Let's go out and kill. We're going to hunt. So those are both called. So you could subsume the four into three. You could say the maturation effect, the result similar to the cause, but that has two parts: similar to the cause as an experience, similar to the cause as a behavior, and then the environmental effect. Environmental effect means where you will be reborn, what kind of environment you experience. So each of the four opponent forces has a special power to reduce one of them. Regret is the major one to prevent rebirth in the lower realms, the maturation effect. And just to mention one other, say for instance, what's the opponent force which is the major antidote to the habitual, to like say killing again and again or lying again and again? Regret, no. That's mainly that purifies rebirth and say restraint. That's not one of the restraint. Yeah. So taking you could translate it that way. When you resolve not to do the action again of the four opponent forces, one of them is resolving very strongly to restrain or not to do this action again in the future. That helps to cut the continuity of doing the action, habitual action. What's the way that you do that in actuality? How can you practice that? By taking vows. Like that's why the Buddha gave the pratimoksha vows of the layperson and of the sangha, because you vow not to kill, not to lie, not to steal, and so forth, right? And in so doing, if you're mindful of that and you keep that in mind, you've made a strong promise, you all the time, you are leaving an imprint in your mind to purify that habitual karmic results. Otherwise, that is the most difficult one to purify. For instance, you can purify being born in the lower realms. You can purify the results of having experiences in your lifetime of being beaten or abused or, all headaches and all these sort of things. But if you don't purify that habitual result, you create that karma again and again in the future. That's the most insidious of those 4 results. You follow what I mean? So even you purify the mind. You've done a Vajrasattva retreat, and most of the negative karmas the karmic seeds have been purified. But if you haven't purified that habitual result, as soon as you finish the retreat, you come out, you start saying harsh words, you cheat the rickshaw driver, or, you step on some cockroach that gets in your way purposely, like that. Okay. So we've gone over a couple of minutes. Let's dedicate the merits that we've created today. Calm your mind, relax your body, calm your mind. See if you could recall that clear light nature of the mind. Let all of these thoughts dissolve back into it. And then re-emerge from that clear light 9, this intention that these karmic seeds that we've created this morning, this life, all the lives in the past, even the future, I dedicate them. May they ripen in such a way that they bring about my continued spiritual progress from life to life, and to quickly achieve the 3 higher trainings: pure ethical behavior, concentration, and wisdom, to achieve liberation and enlightenment, especially enlightenment for the sake of all sentient beings. Due to these merits, may I quickly become a Buddha for the sake of all living beings. Thank you very much.